So we're really fortunate to have the chance to learn about our mind. What are the causes of suffering and problems within our minds, and to learn ways that we can work on our minds and bring about a positive transformation, gradually decreasing those aspects of the mind that bring suffering and problems, and increasing the aspects of the mind that bring peace and happiness. So let's have the wish that we will learn this material well, practice it well, and in that way become more beneficial for other people and for the world, and be able to share even a tiny bit of what we've learned and what we've gained with others, other people, other beings, to bring more peace, more happiness, more well-being into the world. Okay, so I hope everyone received the file with slides for today's class. This is our final class of the semester. And we have been going in this semester, you've been learning about the Lamrim, the stages of the path to enlightenment. And this is actually a huge topic. It contains a huge amount of material. There hasn't been the time to go into every aspect in detail, but you can think of this more as an introduction to the Lamrim, the path to enlightenment. And then if you're interested, you can study it more on your own or with other teachers. And so we're up to the end of the Lamrim, talking about the perfection of wisdom. So this is a bodhisattva's practice to develop the wisdom of emptiness, the true nature of all things. And last time where we left off, we were looking at the object of negation in this whole topic of emptiness. The object of negation that's a term, you've probably heard it before. It's not something we commonly talk about in our everyday language, but it's something important in the topic of emptiness, because when we say things are empty, emptiness is their true nature. There's something that they are empty of. Yeah, emptiness means things are empty of something. So what is that something that things are empty of? That's the meaning of object of negation. The thing we are negating or refuting with regard to phenomena. And so we were talking about that in the last class, and Yangtze Rinpoche said that there's actually of negation. One is the subject, meaning a mind, a consciousness, and that is the ignorance that believes in things to be inherently existing. Okay, so this is a wrong state of mind, a mistaken state of mind that sees inherent existence. Everything appears to be inherently existing, but that's actually wrong. It's false. It's not the way things are. But still, that mind does exist. So that consciousness does exist. In fact, we all have it all the time. It's there in our mind, functioning, causing us to see things in a mistaken way. So that is something that we have to negate. We have to get rid of. We have to realize it's wrong. That way of thinking is wrong. And then the second object of negation is the object. And the object refers to inherent existence. That is what appears to our mind, and our mind just kind of blindly follows it, goes into it, believes in it. But in fact, inherent existence doesn't exist. It's like a false mode of existence. It's like a mirage. I really like the analogy of a mirage. So when we see a mirage, there is an appearance. There is something appearing to our eyes, and we think it's water. It looks like water, but in fact, it's not water. It's just an appearance because of the conditions of the sun overhead and the hot surface of the desert. So those conditions cause this appearance to arise. It looks like water. And then if we're, we are deluded, we think it is water and we want to run there and jump in and swim and have a good time. But it's false. Okay. So there's no water there. So that is something to be rejected, negated. There is no water there. Okay. But there's still the mind, the consciousness that thinks that there is water, believes in water. So that's also something to be negated. And so in the case of emptiness, we do have a mind, ignorance, we call it ignorance, that sees things as inherently existing. And in fact, inherent existence isn't true. It doesn't exist at all. And yet it still appears. So we have to convince ourselves that inherent existence is false. It's not true. It doesn't really exist. And so we negate, we reject inherent existence. And we also have to overcome that mind, get rid of that mind that thinks there is inherent existence. And this, in order to do this, we need to use logic. We need to use reasoning. It's not something we can immediately understand without using reasoning. And so it said, the first important point or step is identifying the object of negation. And this needs to be done correctly, because it's possible to make mistakes. So as Yangtze Rinpoche explains in the book, there are two mistakes that people can make, and they have made in the past, when trying to identify and refute the object of negation. So the first mistake is called over-negation. So what that means is negating too much. When we're trying to negate inherent existence, it's possible to also negate existence, conventional existence, the conventional existence of things. And so he says in the past in Tibet, there were even some masters, some Buddhist masters, meditators, teachers, and so on, who made this mistake. So they were meditating on emptiness, and they got a glimpse of emptiness, a realization of emptiness. And when you have the realization of emptiness, then conventional existence vanishes, it disappears. So all that you experience is this emptiness, this voidness. You don't even see your own body or the bodies of others or any other phenomena. All things vanish, disappear. And the only thing that appears is emptiness. And so they had that experience, and then they concluded that that means nothing exists. Conventional existence doesn't even exist. Things don't even exist conventionally. So they denied or refuted conventional existence. And their conclusion was there is no person, there's no body, there's no world, there's no buildings or cars or trees. None of those things exist. They're totally non-existent. And so this is actually what they would teach and write in their books. And so this is a mistake, at least according to Lama Tsongkhapa and the Gelugpa tradition. They went too far. Like Yangtze Rinpoche said, this is like throwing out the baby with the bathwater. Do you have that expression in Hebrew?
Yeah.
You may have heard it in English.
Yes, we do.
Yeah, throwing out the baby with the bathwater. So that's a good expression. So we don't want to do that. We don't want to throw away conventional existence, because if you do that, then you end up with nihilism. One extreme, this is an extreme view of nihilism, because if you throw out conventional existence, then it's very difficult to explain how cause and effect work, how karma works, how, people make babies and look after babies and so on. So the whole conventional side of things just gets thrown out and refuted. So that's dangerous, and that's a mistake. And then the second kind of mistake is under negation. Under negation means that you don't negate enough. And this is something that all the Buddhist schools except Prasangika fall into. They all make this mistake, because even though they talk about, they do use the word emptiness and selflessness. So they do talk about a certain kind of selflessness or emptiness, but they don't negate enough. They don't negate inherent existence. They negate other things like permanence and, permanent unitary independent self, and a self-sufficient, substantially existent self. So they do negate something, but that's only a partial negation. When it comes to inherent existence, they don't negate that. In fact, they think that inherent existence does exist. They think that things have to exist inherently. They must exist inherently. Otherwise, they wouldn't exist at all. They think if you negate inherent existence, you negate existence altogether. And that's going too far. That's nihilism. So for these other schools, from the point of view of the other schools, the non-Prasangika Buddhist schools, they think the Prasangikas are nihilists. They think Nagarjuna was a nihilist, and Chandrakirti was a nihilist, because they went too far. They threw out inherent existence. Oh, you can't do that. Inherent existence must exist. So they cling to inherent existence, and they don't want to reject that. And so according to our school, if you follow those schools, then you can go so far in your spiritual practice. You can subdue your delusions, you can gain certain realizations, but you can't go all the way to nirvana or enlightenment just with those views. Because according to our school, Prasangika school, you have to negate inherent existence in order to be free of samsara and attain nirvana and attain enlightenment. So as long as you're still hanging on to inherent existence, not wanting to let go of it, then you're not going to make it. And so this is another mistake that's made, and this one leads to the other extreme of eternalism. According to Prasangika, eternalism, or sometimes it's called permanence, that means you're still hanging on to inherent existence. You're clinging to inherent existence. You don't want to refute that. So the term middle way, Madhyamaka, actually means middle way. Middle way means you avoid both of those extremes, nihilism on one hand and eternalism on the other hand. And you find this middle way where you refute inherent existence, but you don't refute conventional existence. You're still able to explain the conventional existence of things. So Lama Tsongkhapa, in his great the Lamrim Chenmo, which Yangtze Rinpoche is giving a commentary to, he said it's actually very difficult to find the middle. It's not easy. It's not obvious. And most people fall into one of those two extremes. Although, if we keep going, we keep, learning and meditating, it is possible eventually to find the middle way, but it's just not easy. And then, so one reason or one problem by these other people and why they make these mistakes is because of not understanding two different kinds of logic or analysis. Down at the bottom of this first slide. One is ultimate and one is conventional. So there's ultimate analysis is when we are searching for the real way that something exists. How does it really exist? It's kind of final mode of existence or absolute mode of existence. So we're really searching into the existence, the way something exists. That's the meaning of ultimate analysis. Conventional analysis, the other one, is just what we normally do in our daily life. We're trying to analyze something or search for something. We're not trying to figure out how it really exists, but we're just trying to figure out, like, for example, let's say, for example, Karina. If we're trying to analyze Karina, investigate Karina, so we could say, well, where is Karina right now? Is she at human spirit, or is she at home, or is she driving in the car somewhere? And then, what exactly is Karina in the sense of, what is her nationality? What is her gender, height, weight, all those kind of things. When you have to fill out a form, you have to give all that information. What's your passport number, date of birth, who are your parents? So that kind of thing is conventional analysis. It's just analyzing something on the conventional level, okay? So that's fine. In the conventional world, we have to do that kind of analysis or investigation. Ultimate analysis is a different thing. Ultimate analysis of Karina, for example, would be saying, what exactly is Karina? What do we mean when we say Karina? And, how does she exist? Is she something we can find when we search among her aggregates, all the parts of her body, all the parts of her mind? Are we able to find something we can point to and say, that is Karina? So that is the meaning of ultimate analysis. Ultimate analysis isn't satisfied with just how things appear and how they function in the world, but it wants to really get to the heart of things. How do things really exist? Are they inherently existing or not? Are they independently existing or not? So that's the meaning of ultimate analysis. So those are two very different kinds of logic and analysis. And if it's important to understand the difference between those, because otherwise, if we think there's only one kind of analysis, and that is ultimate analysis, and then we look for Karina and we can't find Karina, we can't point to any part of her body or mind and say, that is Karina. She disappears when we do that kind of analysis. And if we think that's the only kind of analysis there is, then when we can't find Karina with ultimate analysis, then we might conclude, oh, she's not existent. She doesn't exist. So that's the mistake made by that first group of people who over negate and end up with nihilism, denying conventional existence. And so it's really important to understand there are these two levels of analysis, two ways of analyzing things, and also two levels of truth, two levels of reality, which we have discussed a number of times. There is the conventional reality, conventional existence of things, where things are merely labeled, dependent on causes and conditions and so on. So things do exist on that level. But then there's the ultimate level of reality, ultimate truth. When we really search for things, really analyze things, then we can't find them. Yeah, so it's really important to find, to identify the object of negation, to recognize the object of negation, the thing that we're trying to negate in order to understand emptiness. And it's recommended that we start with our own I, our own sense of self, our I. That's the best place to start with trying to understand emptiness. So the object of negation with regard to our self is inherently existing self, inherently existing I. And even though this is something that appears to us, in fact, it's appearing to us all the time. Whenever we think I, or we say I, or we feel I, we feel I am here sitting in this place, sitting on this chair. I am talking, but in your case, you are listening. Hopefully you're listening and not falling asleep or looking at your phone or something else. But anyway, there is a sense of an I here. And that's the object of negation, because whenever we have a feeling of I, it's always inherently existing I. We never see anything other than that. We never see a merely labeled I, a merely conventional I. We always see inherently existing I. So it's with us all the time. But it's very difficult to kind of step back from that experience and be able to look at it and recognize myself as inherently existing. That's not easy to do, because it's almost like our mind is glued to seeing ourselves as inherently existing, and hard to get unstuck from that and be able to see it objectively. And so there's numerous explanations from the masters of the past and also present about how to recognize the object of negation. And in the second slide in your file, there's a quotation from the fifth Dalai Lama's text, which is called the Sacred Words of Manjushri. This is a Lamrim text. And it hasn't been translated into English, but I heard somebody has translated it. I think maybe Thupten Jinpa, and it's going to be published soon, which will be wonderful, because apparently it's a wonderful text. But Jeffrey Hopkins made a translation of the wisdom chapter, part of the wisdom chapter. And so he translated this particular section where the Dalai Lama, fifth Dalai Lama, explains the object of negation. And apparently this is regarded as a very good explanation about how to recognize your I, the inherently existing I. And so he actually says, first you develop calm abiding. So after developing calm abiding, then you check for your I. So that might sound rather daunting, that we first have to develop calm abiding, but it does make sense, because I think we do need a very focused, very concentrated state of mind. If our mind is agitated, as it usually is, then it's difficult to do this. But anyway, so he says, after developing calm abiding, then use that very concentrated mind to cause the sense of I to come up. And then He says, while the general consciousness remains on the I with distinct force, a corner of the mind should watch its mode of apprehension and analyze the way in which the I is being conceived. And he uses the analogy of if you're walking together with another person and having a conversation. So most of your focus is on the path, the road that you're walking on, but from the corner of your eye, you can see the other person. You're aware of the other person next to you. So he says it's a similar thing. When you're trying to look for the I, mainly you're focused on the I itself, that sense of I, but a corner of your mind should watch that I and try to recognize how it appears. And so there's this quotation here. He says, sometimes it will, this is the I, sometimes it will seem to be related with the body. Sometimes it will seem to be related with the mind. So sometimes our sense of I is more with our body, feeling I am this body. But sometimes it may be more related with our mind, like when we're thinking or meditating, or you're doing your analysis with your patients and so on. So then the sense of I is more related with our mind. Sometimes it will seem to be related with the other individual aggregates, like feelings and so forth. At the end of the arising of such a variety of modes of appearance, you will come to identify an I that exists in its own right, that exists inherently, that from the start is self-established, existing undifferentiatedly in relation to the mind and body, which are also mixed like milk and water. So this is, considered a very good explanation of what our sense of inherently existing I appears to be when we can really recognize it, really get it. And it's probably something that would take time, a long time of searching and meditating to be able to recognize it. But it's good to at least have this kind of description. And this is actually in a book called How to See Yourself as You Really Are. I don't know if you have that available in Israel. It's a very nice little book. Jeffrey Hopkins put it together, but it's the Dalai Lama's teachings on emptiness.
It is translated to Hebrew.
You have it in Hebrew. Oh, good. It's a wonderful book. Very helpful.
We have it. We got it from in one of our retreats.
Okay, yeah, I think I remember that. Good. So keep that like a Bible, like a holy book. Okay, so then that's like the first step, is getting in touch with our I. And then we use some reasoning, some kind of process of reasoning to investigate it. And there's a number of different reasonings. So in the book, Yangtze Rinpoche mentions the 4-point meditation. I think that we did that before. I look back at my notes and I know in year 4, semester A, we did learn that one. So you can go back and look at your notes from that. But today I'd like to talk about this other one, which is called Chandrakirti's 7-fold reasoning. I like this one a lot. And I had the chance to study it during the master's program. We studied the whole of Chandrakirti's text, which is called Entering the Middle Way. So this is contained in that. And Chandrakirti first uses a chariot. It's a method for realizing emptiness of the I, but he first talks about it with regard to a chariot. It's helpful to use it with some external object, some physical object we can see and touch, and then apply it to the I. And so we're going to go through this. We don't have much time, but just quickly go through it with a car. We use a car instead of a chariot. And so when we see a car, especially a really nice, beautiful, new, brand new, shiny car, we'll probably see that car as inherently existing. It appears like there's an inherently, independently existing car, and we probably have attachment to it. If you're not interested in cars, you could use something else that you do have interest in, clothing or jewelry or phones or something, food, something you get excited about. So you can use that as an example. And so we try to get a sense of how this object appears inherently existing. And then Chandra goes through these 7 points. If there really is such a thing as an inherently existing car, then it must exist in one of these 7 ways. So we'll go through these one by one. This is just the list of them here. And I'll go through them individually, but there's a couple of pictures that help you. A picture of a brand new shiny red Mercedes Benz. So if we saw that parked outside, we'd probably look, wow, look at that beautiful car. And we might have some attachments, some desire coming up. We would like to own a car like that and be able to drive it around. And then the next picture, it's not a Mercedes, but it's another kind of car. But anyway, you get the idea that a car is just composed of a whole bunch of different parts. There's probably hundreds or maybe even thousands of different parts that make up a car. So there you can see most of the parts have been disassembled and laid out on the ground. So that's what a car is really all about, just all these parts, all these bits and pieces. So they could have taken this apart even more, taken apart the body of the car, but we can do that mentally. Okay, so that's a car and its parts. So the next slide is starting to go through these 7 points one by one. Is there an inherently existing car? Okay, so if it does exist, we should be able to find it in one of these ways. The first one is the car inherently one with its parts? So this is searching to see if an inherently existing car can be found as one with its parts or the same as its parts. This isn't something we normally think about, but it's part of Buddhist philosophy, and it's probably Indian philosophy as well. So if you have 2 things like a car and its parts, and if they are inherently one means exactly the same in every way. There would be no difference at all between them. They have to be, because that's the case with inherent existence. If there's an inherently existing car and it's one with its parts, it has to be absolutely one in every way. Because an inherently existing car means it doesn't depend on anything else. It's totally independent, standalone. And so it doesn't depend on causes and conditions. It has to be absolutely one, absolutely independent. So if such a car did exist, and if it was one with its parts, then the car and the parts have to be absolutely one. This takes a while to think about. It took me years and years and years to figure this out. It was only when I studied Chandra's text that I finally understood it. So don't worry if it doesn't make sense the first time. But anyway, these would be the faults, the absurd consequences, if the car was one with its parts. So one consequence would be, just as there are many parts, there should be many cars. Okay, there should be as many cars as there are parts. So if you have 1,000 parts, let's just say 1,000 parts of a car, then when you buy one car, you're actually buying 1,000 cars, which would be really cool. 1,000 cars for the price of one. That's a good deal. But obviously that is absurd. You don't have 1,000 cars. You have only one car. Or the other alternative is if there is only one car, then there should be only one part. You wouldn't have 1,000 parts. Only one part. It would be like whole, monolithic, seamless. Okay, so I was talking about the possibility of the car and the parts being inherently different. And if that was the case, then they would have to be completely separate, and there would be no connection, no relationship at all between the car and the parts of the car, because that would be a consequence of being inherently, absolutely different. They would be able to exist completely separately. And if that was the case, then it should be possible to have the parts of the car in one place and have the car in another place. For example, you could keep the parts of your car in the garage or in front of your house, and the car could be driving around somewhere else. So obviously that is impossible. That is absurd. Or another consequence mentioned here is you could sell all the parts of the car and you'd still have the car. So that would be cool. You could make a lot of money selling the parts of the car, and you could still have the car and own it and drive it around. So that would be an absurd consequence of that particular idea. The third one, actually the third and fourth are quite similar. They talk about dependence. Does the car inherently depend on its parts? So this would be, if we have a sense of the inherently existing car being like something that holds the parts, like a bowl or a container holding all the parts. So we might have that kind of sense of the car in relation to its parts. But if that was the case, if there was an inherently existing car that depends on its parts, then they would have to be different, inherently different. And then they would have the same faults as number 2, the second point, that they would be inherently different. And that's also absurd. Number 4 is similar, except that here is the sense of the parts depending on the car. The car is there, and I think I've got these mixed up actually. But anyway, both of those two, whether the parts depend on the car or the car depends on the parts, and they have that kind of relationship. If that was the case, then they would have to be inherently different. And then you'd have the same faults as in number 2. I'm rushing a bit because we're short of time, but let's go to the next one, number 5. So here we're searching if the car inherently possesses its parts. We do say that. We do say like the car's parts or the parts of the car, as if the car is the possessor, the owner of the parts. And according to Buddhist logic, there's 2 ways of possession, 2 ways that one thing can possess another thing. One is if the 2 things are different natures. An example is a person like Joe, just a person named Joe or whatever, owning a house. So we say Joe owns a house. That's Joe's house. So in that kind of possession, Joe and the house are different things, are different natures, because Joe and his house are 2 different things. Joe can walk away from his house, he can sell his house, and he can still exist without owning the house. So those are 2 different things. So if the car possesses its parts in that way, like the car is a different thing than the parts, then they would have the same faults as number two. The car and its parts would be two different things. And you could have the car in one place and the parts in another place. So obviously that is absurd. That is impossible. The second way of possession is when the two things are one nature. So example, Joe and his body. So we say Joe's body, but Joe's body isn't a completely separate thing from Joe. Joe can't walk away from his body, and his body would be in one place and he'd be in another place. So Joe, it's fine to say Joe owns a body or Joe has a body or Joe's body, but Joe and his body are one nature, meaning they can't be separated. You can't separate them, see them separately. And so if the car owned its parts, if the car possessed its parts in that way, then they would be one nature. Car and the parts would be one nature, and they'd be inherently one nature. So then they would have the same faults as in number one, going back to number one. So again, this is something one needs to contemplate, to think about, to get it, to understand these absurdities that would follow if we thought that. So number 6 is the car, the assembly or collection of its parts. I think most of us would think that. We think that the car is just the collection of all the parts. It's not one of its parts. It's not separate from its parts. But when you have all the parts of the car together, then that's what a car is. So what Chandra says to that is, then you should be able to disassemble all the parts and put them in a pile, or like in that photo that we saw earlier, all the parts are kind of laid out on the ground, and you would have a car. You have all the parts are there, then a car should be there. And you should be able to get into the car and drive it away. And so we would say, no, you have to put all the parts together in the right way. Then it's a car. Then you have a car. But what I came to when thinking about that is to say collection. What is a collection? A collection of the parts. What exactly is a collection? Is it really something different than all the parts? Like when all the parts are there spread out on the ground, at that point in time, you can't find a car. There's no car there that functions as a car. And so, but all the parts are there. And so then when you say, well, if you put all the parts together, then there's a car. Now it's a car. But where did that car come from? If you can't find the car in all the parts, none of the parts is the car, then how can there be a car when you put all the parts together? You haven't added anything. Nothing has been added to all the parts when they've been taken apart and spread out. No new thing has been added. So where is this car? So usually we have to think about that. And it's good to do this visually, like really imagine taking all the parts apart and you can't find the car. And then you think, oh, now all the parts are together. Now there's a car. But what is that car? Is there really something you can point to as being that car? It kind of, if you do this well, it kind of explodes your idea of a real inherently existing car. Also, the second bullet point says, if the car isn't in the pile of parts, there are also no car parts. Okay, so if you have just a whole bunch of parts spread out there and you agree there's no car at that point in time, nothing functions as a car, then also those parts can't really be car parts. If there's no car, how can you have parts of a car? So again, this helps you get the sense of things being merely labeled. Okay, we merely label car on that assemblage of parts, that collection of parts when they've all been put together. We just call it a car. But car isn't something we can find, we can point to as a specific thing. And the same with parts of a car. Parts of a car are only car parts in relation to a car. If there's a car, you can talk about parts of a car. So they also exist totally dependently and not independently. So just quickly, the last one, number 7, is the car the shape of the parts? And I never fully understood this, but I guess somebody thought, as a last desperate attempt to find an inherently existing car, the person said, oh, it's the shape of the parts, the shape of the parts. So Chandra does spend some time discussing this, and he concludes none of the individual shapes of the parts, like the wheels and the windows and the motor. So none of those individual shapes is a car. And even when you put all those shapes together, you also can't find a car. Again, that's something that would take time to explore to really get it. But also, when we think about what we do with a car, how a car functions, it's something we drive. So when we drive a car, are we driving a shape? Is that what we're actually driving, is a shape? So the next slide just kind of explains how a car does exist. We're not denying the existence of a car. We're not saying there is no car at all. The car does exist conventionally because we can drive it, we can buy a car, we can sell a car, we can smash a car, we can wash a car. So there is something there that functions, but it's not inherently existing, independently existing. It's just what we label in relation to its parts. That's the conventionally existing car. And even the parts of the car, if we examine those, we analyze those, we can see that they too exist dependently. They are merely labeled in dependence on their parts. They have parts too. Okay. So that's just quickly. And then we apply this to the self, the I. We don't have time to go through that, but it's very similar. Looking for the I, the sense of an I, person, me, Sangye Khadro, Karina, Renan, whatever. What is this I? Does it exist inherently, independently? And we can do the same analysis, but instead of parts of car, we look at the parts of a self, which are the aggregates of body and mind. Okay, so we look at these 7 different possibilities. Is the I one with the aggregates? Is it separate from the aggregates, and so on? So yeah, it's a wonderful, ideally it would take many hours, many days, months, years to really go through all these points and meditate on them. But if you do it well, then the result is emptiness, realizing the emptiness, the lack of inherent existence of the car or the I or whatever. Yeah, so we didn't have time to go through all the parts of this section, different logic and so on and so forth. So that's something you can read on your own. And this topic of Lam Rim, which you've been learning about in this semester, it's really, really wonderful. It's really rich. And I hope you've at least found it interesting and something you would like to explore more, there's many Lamrim books, different lengths, short and long, and it's good. I mean, ideally, we have to hear the Lamrim again and again, read it again and again, meditate it on it again and again. It's like a life work to really understand the Lamrim, but it's wonderful. And it's so practical too, because it's really about us and our lives and our minds and our problems and how to free ourselves from our problems and how to cultivate positive states of mind, especially bodhicitta and so on and so forth. This is just a treasure of wonderful material. And just the very last slide here, there's just a few quotes from the book that I thought were nice. These are in the conclusion. Yangtze Rinpoche says, there's no path to enlightenment that lies outside your own mind. So it's really about our own mind, working with our mind, transforming our mind, bringing our mind to enlightenment. And then he said, the main objective of Dharma practice is to limitlessly develop the positive potential of your own mind. So it is said that we have limitless potential. We can develop ourselves in a limitless way, meaning we can cultivate these positive qualities like love and compassion and wisdom just more and more and more and more, eventually to the point of being fully enlightened, Buddha. So this has been just a quick look at the Lamrim, the path to enlightenment, and I hope it has been beneficial. We've learned something useful from it, and we have definitely created merit or positive energy, because just making the effort to learn these teachings is very beneficial, very positive. So let's finish the class by dedicating the merit we've created here today, but also all through this semester. Let's share this positive energy with all other sentient beings all over the universe. May it bring them genuine peace, happiness, freedom from suffering, and eventually, ultimately, the state of full enlightenment, Buddhahood.